Good afternoon, everyone. We just had a small tour of the various departments here, all 5 of them. Many years ago when I first came here, there was only one department, and that was the one of exploration, surveys and things like that. And oh my goodness, I can't believe it's times 5 now. So today's talk will be about herping in Africa. And you may wonder what herping means. Well, it's not only Africa. I'm going to end up with a little bit in Madagascar. But herping is the study or the exploration or the surveys of reptiles and amphibians. I'm saying this to an audience that of course knows, but when I'm in South Africa speaking to a general audience, most people don't understand the concept of herping. I'm Marius and I'm currently back in Madagascar under the auspices of Base Resources Australia and Madagascar. And because of this specific project, we will be here several more times, at least in this year, and probably for several years to come. And after the discussions with the various people today, I'm anticipating that there was going to be some collaborations between all of us, and so we should start getting used to each other's faces. We'll probably see more of it as we go along. I'm also affiliated with the Northwest University, African Amphibian Conservation Research Group, and Flora, Fauna and Man Ecological Services. It's another company where I do environmental impact assessments or faunal surveys in different places, mostly in Africa. So I have about 45 minutes to do this, and it's going to be tough because we're going to visit 9 places in Africa. We'll start off in South Africa, go to Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya for Alistair, and then off to Gabon, the Republic of the Congo, Central African Republic, and Liberia. And right in the end, we're also going to have a quick visit to Madagascar, because this is a place that I fell in love with in 1993 already. I think some of you weren't born then at that stage. I've been in about a bit more than 30 countries in Africa, chasing after reptiles and amphibians, herping in Africa, you could say. And when did this start? At some stage or another, we're all little boys. I can't remember. I think I'm about standard 7 or standard 8 at school here, that green mamba. I showed my mother this photo this morning, and she laughed at my shoes and my socks, because I haven't really worn socks for a long time. But as evolution would have it, we change over time. We can't stay the same. So youth gives way to, let's say, wisdom. All right, that sounds better than old age. And so I said I'm going to start off in South Africa, and there's a project, it's an old project called the Southern African Reptile Conservation Assessment, call it SARCA for short. When was it? It was done in the early 2005, 2006, 2007, and we were updating the conservation status of the reptiles of South Africa, and we digitized records from the museums, all of the data that were available in museums. And as you can imagine, a lot of that data was wrong or rough. So that was almost the biggest task of it all. Literature, that's a bit more simple, digitizing records from literature. At the time, we also started the concept of a virtual museum, where citizen scientists, people that are just everyday people, they may not necessarily be biologists like us, but they still have an interest in nature. They would photograph the reptiles, upload it to well, nowadays we call it an app, but it was called the Virtual Museum. And in that way, many people were assisting to this specific project. I also had a component of field work, field trips, and I'm going to be showing you some of that right now. And part of field trips is the collection of voucher specimens. Some people don't like it, but it is absolutely essential for morphological reasons, for molecular reasons, and also in between. You know, once you have a specimen like this from different parts of South Africa or from its distribution, you can start comparing males and females and juveniles. You can start looking at internal morphology, at diet, at reproductive state, and all kinds of things. So voucher specimens, even though I could say some people disagree with it because they prefer the live animal, it certainly has a very important role in these surveys. At the time, we came up with some sort of a gap analysis. Where in South Africa are we expecting lots of species but nothing is known? And this is what our gap analysis looked like. I don't have a lot of confidence that it was absolutely accurate, but I ended up going to the dark blue circles, the red and the red circles. In a space of about 1.5 years, I think we had, or 2 years, we had 24 surveys in South Africa. Most of them were only 10 days long, but some of them were about a month or even longer. And on each trip, I had volunteers joining me, and that was by word of mouth and advertising through the websites. Some of the people were students. We were doing active searching in the day. Oh, by the way, that previous one, that there is the nest of a sociable weaver. It's a bird that creates this giant nest in trees, and it became so heavy that it bent a steel pole. You scratch around in there, you get all kinds of geckos and even snakes. At night, when you drive on roads, a lot of snakes are nocturnal, they move around in the night. So you have this transect through your study area, and just by driving for several hours, you have good chances of encountering snakes on the road. So road cruising, a very effective, slightly lazy and laid-back manner, but method, but still functional. And then I think you guys are familiar with pitfall and trap arrays. Steve's arrays are like 100 meters long with 11 buckets, usually in a straight line. We use something a little different. 3 fences of 10 meters each with 4 pitfall traps. A pitfall is really just a bucket sunk into the ground of about 20 liters. And we also had 6 funnel traps. There's some examples of these trap arrays in place. Nowadays, I don't use the Y or X shape. I just have straight arrays, but shorter than the Bahatra arrays. So I don't have 100 meters. I've got 30 meters, but more of them. So instead of 3 times 100, I may have a 10 times 3 or something like that. All right, and as a bycatch, you would have small mammals in there, scorpions, frogs, invertebrates, and once in a while a real surprise, like even mongooses were on time captured by these funnel traps. And when you have the traps or the funnels under a tree with a sociable weaver nest, you can even find small birds in there. But in reality, what we want are the snakes and lizards and so forth. And if a snake like this had to go into a pitfall trap, the snake is very long. It will just climb out again. So a pitfall trap is very useful for small reptiles. But if you want to catch the snakes, you also need funnel traps. Okay, for quite quickly, I'm just going to run through the 24 groups of people that joined me on these trips. Some of them I've never heard of before. This one guy was from Holland. He was in holiday in South Africa. The other guy was a student. He just finished school a year or so before. The guy in the middle is a lawyer. Really just mixed people with an interest. In fact, sometimes not even an interest in reptiles. They end up volunteering and not exactly sure what they volunteered for. And off they are on a circuit trip with me for 10 days. At very exciting areas in South Africa, and several of them were foreigners. Like that, the previous one there was a German student, and it's not all work. We have fun along the way. We improvise, and on this particular case, on one day we managed to find 3 Cape Cobras. One in a funnel trap, one at the accommodation where we stayed, we came into the room, and the other one on the road. So 3 different methods of finding cobra. To take this photo was quite difficult because I would put a bucket down on the 3 cobras so that the cobras don't run in different directions, and then I would get the 3 volunteers to sit behind the bucket, and as soon as I lift the bucket up and the cobra rears, the volunteers would jump out of the picture. So I had to threaten and demand some discipline to get that photo. Sarka group number 9 with a big old monitor lizard. Also one dead on the road. So even dead on road animals are as useful as live on road animals. In fact, in some cases, a bit more useful because you can get a voucher specimen or some tissue samples. And depending on where we are, if there's a school or something like that, we would add to the survey by visiting a school. This was quite funny because initially I'm just talking and the people are looking at me like, why are you telling us about catching snakes? And of course, the first snake that I pulled out, the people would just pour out of the windows. Literally, there were some people jumping out of the windows. So about 3/4 of the class lost enthusiasm for what we were talking about, but some of them were very excited. Okay, so trip number 11, we had some television there, making a television program. Also on trip number 12. And on trip number 12, one of the traps caught a spitting cobra. Now, it's in the name. If you have a spitting cobra, this is not really what you should be doing, looking at a spitting cobra, because they can spit their venom over a distance of about 1.5 to even 2 meters, depending on the wind conditions. And this guy is a professor from Wits University, Professor Graham Alexander. I took the photo. My friend was holding the funnel, and Graham was standing behind me wearing glasses. And still, the venom got into his eyes. Oh, I forgot to say, I should say it beforehand, but in case you are sensitive about some of these photos, there will be 2 or 3 photos that are like that. Perhaps by the time it gets to YouTube, they will probably want you to blur it. Trip number 13, lovely Cape coral snake. 14, any guesses what that very long grey snake may be? It's a dangerous snake, a deadly snake in Africa. And that's the beauty of Africa versus Madagascar. Right in the end, I'm going to be talking about Madagascar. There's not a single snake here that you really need to worry about in terms of life-threatening venom. Some have venom, but nothing can kill you. This is the infamous black mamba, one of the most deadly snakes and most feared snakes in Africa. The guy on the far left there in the blue t-shirt is Johan Marais. He's a very famous herpetologist in South Africa. One of the reasons is that he's published several books on the reptiles and snakes of South Africa mostly. Trip number 15, 16, all kinds of people wanting their share of a Sarka trip. This guy joined about 3 or 4 trips in a row. I can't remember, but he just couldn't get enough of these trips. And early on, as I showed you, the dead monitor lizards on the road, when you stop and you cut them open to look at the stomach contents, we would remove the stomachs. It was amazing to see how many of them were feeding on tortoises. So it's not something that you would really expect unless you start looking inside. Because you think of a monitor lizard going around, it will eat the eggs of birds, it will eat insects, it will try and a small mammal where they can, and lizards and snakes. But, tortoise, that was a surprise. But I can't remember the numbers or anything like that, but a substantial proportion of those Varanus monitor lizards were eating tortoises. Number 19, more German volunteers. Now we are in a place near the Kruger National Park, so there were several people interested in what we were doing. This was also on a mining area. A little later on, we're going to talk about how mining works in the context of biodiversity. But this was one of those examples where there was an existing copper mine in Palabova, but they had large areas of conservation bordering the Kruger National Park. And that's where we were conducting our surveys. Areas that were, as I said, it was, according to the gap analysis, an area that was unknown. So the records that we were finding there, sometimes common species, sometimes rare, but even so, almost all of them were new for those specific regions. All right, so everyone was interested to see what the traps may hold in the mornings. Even the small children came along. These were children of the mine workers. Trip number 21 was interesting because the one day we were checking our traps, and what would interfere while we were checking traps? A leopard. Now this was disconcerting, to put it mildly. By the time I take this photo, we already know there's a tame leopard, but the first time we didn't know it. So we all jumped into the vehicle because the leopard just walked in, and then it was explained to us that he's got a collar around his neck. He's a tame leopard, a hand-raised leopard, which I really don't like. I love wild animals, but I'm not keen on tame wild animals because that's where things go wrong. Sometimes I was walking and I can see this leopard would just go there and it would wait behind a bush and jump out wow, vaza, But fortunately, nothing ever happened. But it wasn't my idea of being funny. Trip number 22 was on the border of a country used to be called Swaziland. It's called Eswatini now, in the Lebombo Mountains. And I would drive and I'd look for areas to put out my traps. And I'd say, okay, good, there's nobody here. This is a great place. And I would dig one hole and then suddenly there would be 20 people. Like where they came from. You would look around before and there's absolutely nobody there. But so to some extent I was worried about them interfering with the traps. But in reality, they really helped us. Every time we arrived there in the morning, people had various things of what they'd caught the day before. So quite useful. On trip number 23, we had the girl is from Holland or the Netherlands, and the guy is a journalist from Croatia. And this was one of those long trips where we had volunteers coming and going. I can't remember, 6, 7, 8 volunteers as we're going along. And this particular guy I can't really blame him, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm blaming him for something that's coming a little later on. If he was here right in the room, of course, I wouldn't blame him at all. He's a lovely chap, old Goran Safarik. Okay, the two girls from the Netherlands. This guy, the previous guy, has been on some of the trips. Keshni from the SANBI, South African National Biodiversity Institute. Also a guy that's been on a previous trip before. And which brings me to Goran Safarik. First, many years ago, there was a book written by a man called Walter Rose. Can't remember when it was published. Let's say in the 1950s, perhaps in the 1960s. I can't remember. And the book had about 30 or 40 chapters. Nothing like the natural history of Madagascar, but it was still one of the first books on the reptiles and amphibians of South Africa. And there were all these different chapters. Snakes, frogs, lizards, venomous snakes, chameleons, blah, blah, blah. And one of the chapters was called Advice to the Beginner Snake Enthusiast on How to Keep Deadly Venomous Snakes in Captivity. All right, so this is the title. And then you go to that page, maybe page 122, and it just says don't. Which is really good advice. Venomous snakes, it's possible to handle them, but things can go wrong. So this particular puffer, as my one volunteer was training on how to handle the snakes safely with a hook, the trainer was not so lucky because Goran Safarik wanted to see the fangs of the puffadder because he's a journalist. He wanted some photos of that. I pinned the puffadder on the soft sand. Because the sand was soft, every time I tried to grab the head, twice in a row, it just pulled out. And instead of moving the snake to a solid, hard surface, I tried one more time. But I misjudged, and he sunk his fangs into my thumb. So there's going to be 1 or 2 photos that are not so good to look at. So close your eyes now if you like. So this is the difference between snakes in Africa and snakes in Madagascar. This particular venom is cytotoxic, so it attacks the tissue. It's a tissue-destroying venom, and it took almost 6 months for that necrosis to heal to a point that you would be socially acceptable again. But this bite is still better than a bite from, let's say, a neurotoxic venom like a cobra or a mamba, because this one's probably not going to kill you, whereas the other one has a much greater chance of killing you. Okay, I think this was the last SARCA trip, number 24, in an area where we were looking for a lizard that we think is extinct. It's only known, or it may be extinct. It's difficult to prove that something is extinct just because you can't find it. But it's only known from 2 specimens collected in 1927 or in around that era. We never found it. We've tried since and we still haven't found it, so we really don't know. Okay, that's the end of SARCA. So remember, we're visiting 9 countries. Some of the others will be shorter. We just kicked off in South Africa. Oh, by the way, the projects were also published in 2014. There was a book on the conservation status and the Atlas of the Reptiles of South Africa, and this was revised in 2023. If you just Google the titles of these books, you can find PDFs to download them if you're interested. Okay, now we're going northeast of South Africa, a place called Mozambique, and we're moving into the kind of work that we are also going to do in Madagascar. The area in Tulia is a mining project where they mine elements from the sand, components that are used in a variety of. In fact, I don't even know too much about the Tulia project, but one of the things that these elements were used in were paints. And it's quite amazing that you can do so much mining for just something to add to paint, to make the paint better or something. I know there's a lot more to it, but anyway, so this was a project where we were doing some biodiversity surveys, including reptiles and amphibians. I'm just briefly going to go through some of the reptiles. One of the problems that the people had there is when they have built these artificial ponds is from time to time crocodiles would become established in there. So now they're working on how do we move these crocodiles, or how do we keep the crocodiles out and so forth. Terrapins, you have chelonians living in the water and on land as well. And once in a while vehicles would drive over animals, and those are also useful, as I said in the past. But the people in Mozambique and a lot of countries in Africa, people eat snakes. So sometimes they would just kill them because they're scared of the snakes. They think it may be dangerous. But many of the snakes are killed to be eaten, like this python. Here are 2 monitor lizards also with the aim of caught. Well, in this case, they wanted to show me. And it was a water monitor and a rock monitor. But ultimately, it is to eat them. And then people would bring me things like that. They see here's a guy going around looking for reptiles, and I'm casually opening just a little basket that they weaved there, expecting a chameleon or something like that, and inside was a puff adder. The same thing that did that to my finger, and this is whatever 15, 20 years later, and I'm still learning lessons. I got such a fright when I realized, because they just casually said, yeah, here we go, here's a little basket with something in it. And prior to that, they gave us chameleons. So I thought, but I was wrong. This is a cobra, a species of forest cobra that the people killed. And this cobra was eating a python. Can you imagine a cobra growing to the size that it was eating a small python? I was very happy with this because it ended up being a museum specimen. But yeah, a substantial snake contribution from that particular village. Many more snakes in the area. I really can't go into details of the survey results. Things like cobras aren't really interesting, but as soon as you start getting to the small snakes that live underground or semi-fossorial, those are the snakes that are a lot more seldom encountered, and those are the interesting ones. Same with the lizards, and this one in particular, Scolochiceps boulengeri. Prior to us finding 3 specimens, it was known from barely a handful of specimens, known from only 2 places in the whole world, only in Mozambique at 2 places, and the last time those were found was like 50 years before that. So it was one of those mystery species. Does it still exist? Where are they? There have been groups of people trying to find them, they couldn't, and just because we were doing the baseline assessments for the mines, here we go, another mystery addressed. Now we're moving up to Tanzania, 5 different projects for hydroelectric power. So a lot of the surveys are varied. Mining could be one of them. In Kenya, we'll be looking at a road extension or a road upgrade. This is where they look at the rivers and the streams to channel them or to modify them for the production of generating electric power. In this area, like in Madagascar, a lot of the regions have been cultivated to the extent that there's not a whole lot of natural vegetation or habitat left to survey. But from time to time you get gems like this. This is a waterfall, and in Tanzania there's this one example of the Kiansi spray toad. It was a small species of frog that was discovered while doing an impact assessment for the hydroelectric power project, and it turns out that frog only lived in the spray zone, and it was just a few hectares, the spray zone created by that waterfall. So if you tunnel or channel that waterfall into turbines and things like that, and the spray disappears, then the frog also disappears. It's a long story. I'm not going to get into it now. If you're interested, we can chat about it later. But that was one of the things that we were looking for. Are there sections where there's significant spray, so much so that you can have a frog that is endemic and or restricted to that particular zone? it's nice and wet. I really enjoy being out in the bush, whether it's dry or whether it's hot. A lot of people prefer an office life. I don't think I would last too long in an office. I would have to have my fair share of survey time. This is one of my colleagues, Ryan van Heestien, and that smile is because on day one, on the first funnel, the previous thing is a funnel trap, the first funnel trap we pick up, on day one, we hit the jackpot. We found a snake that was really known from, I think, less than 12 specimens. There, and somewhere in the paper, I read it was one of the rarest snakes, most poorly known snakes ever, you know. And first funnel, first day, we hit the jackpot. We were so happy. It's called Atheris barbari, so I guess barbers, I'm not sure what it was called in English, Atheris barbari. All right, a crazy little viper, and most vipers, we're used to them eating small mammals or something like that. Apparently this viper feeds on worms, which is a bizarre thing for a viper to do. Night adder, a common species, the snouted night adder, some slug eaters. So quite a few snakes have specialized diets. Some only eat eggs, or in this case slugs. There may be some that are specializing in eating fish and so forth. Most of the snakes you find there are harmless. When people see green snakes, they're usually quite worried about it, but these are 2 species of harmless greens, in fact 3 species of harmless green snakes. But not all green snakes are harmless. We also found green mamba. So green doesn't mean it's good to go. You have to know the difference between them. And when you don't know, when you're not sure, it's better to be cautious and just say, all right, it's a green snake, I won't interfere too much. Now, Madagascar is renowned for chameleons. I'm trying to remember the numbers now. I think you guys have something like 42% of all of the chameleons in the world, which is, I think, almost 100 of the world's 240. I'm just grasping at numbers, you know, I can't remember the exact numbers, but occur in Madagascar. But East Africa is also extremely rich in chameleons. The previous one, the genus was Cameleo. So although Madagascar is just a few hundred kilometers from Africa, every single genus of chameleon in Madagascar is different to Africa and vice versa. We don't share the same genera. Cameleo, Triceros, this is also Triceros, Kinyonga, or Kinyongia, and Rampholion. Now you look at this and you immediately think, Bruchisia, you know, it resembles Bruchisia of Madagascar, but they have their differences. Okay, now we briefly in Kenya, and those green and yellow lines is a road upgrade from between Nairobi, and I can't remember what the northwestern region was. But yeah, it's an elongated project. So typically you have one study area that you work in, but here we had to move between different bases. Again, I'm not going to go into detail too much, finding a variety of snakes, and we had a big focus on reptiles or all kinds of biodiversity that may be specifically living close to the roads themselves. Getting back to the chameleons, now you can see why the genus is called Triceros, because some of them have 3 horns, not all of them have 3 horns. But Madagascar has the main leading chameleons, but so does East Africa. One of the geckos I found there. Now look at the tail of that gecko. A little later on, but when we get to Madagascar, I'm going to draw a correlation between the tail of that gecko and a gecko from Madagascar. But so most of the time it's reptiles, but if I have to confess, I actually prefer amphibians. So I go and I do surveys on reptiles and amphibians, and reptiles are generally more popular because there's snakes and it's a lot more glamorous, you know. And if I tell people I study frogs, it's not the same impact. It doesn't have the same value as saying, look, I'm catching pythons and cobras and mambas. So that's where the popularity lies, the hoo-ha of being a snake person, but I'm a frog guy. And what I do when I struggle to convince people about why I would like frogs, I say, well, you know, frogs have very interesting reproductive ways, what they do. We always think of frogs laying their eggs. The eggs going through metamorphosis slowly into different larval stages of tadpoles, and then eventually becoming a frog again. And that in itself is quite amazing. I mean, at one stage you're an herbivorous tadpole with a long intestine, and eventually all of that changes. You're becoming an insectivore, and even your gut has to change. Your gills have to go. You've got to have lungs. Everything changes. And if you look at the different manners of amplexus when frogs breed, it's typically we think of, let's say, number B, or seems kind of normal. But E is fat little frogs from Africa. You can see they're too fat. The male's arms are too short, and they're both too fat for a proper grip. So they exude a glue. And so they're stuck to each other, and the female then burrows backwards into the ground and lay the eggs under the ground. And from the egg comes a frog. There's never a stage when the tadpole is in the water, so it's a terrestrial breeding strategy. Number D is a frog from Madagascar. I didn't think this was real when I first saw the graphics of it. I think it was Mantidactylus liber or something like that. But at some point or another, I noticed, yes, there's the male will go sit on the head of the female. Number F, I've never encountered, but that seems interesting. All right, 1995 was the year when the richness of amphibians overtook that of mammals. It doesn't mean that amphibians now became more than mammals. It just means that there's always been greater interest in mammals, taxonomically speaking. So many more mammals were described than amphibians. But in 1995, it finally overtook mammals. And in that year, what's that? That's 30 years ago, right? There were 4,650 amphibian species known and described in the world. 10 years later, went up about 1,300 or so records. In 10 years, 1,300 new amphibians were described. Right now, it's 8,883. In fact, yesterday it was 8,880. So since yesterday, there's another 3 described. If you look at the last 15 years or so, but more, every year has had more than 100 new amphibians described, and very often, sometimes almost even 200. Already 32 new species for 2025. Similarly, in Madagascar, when the first book on amphibians of Madagascar came out, it was 150 species of amphibians in Madagascar. 2 years later, it went up by 20. All right, that's pretty, there we go. And then quite a while later, it went up to 233 in 2007. And 2025, right now, it's 432. So basically, from 150 in 92 to it's not times 3, but it's almost times 3. So Madagascar is just an amphibian haven, if that is your interest, and it is my interest. And for context, if you compare this with South Africa, Madagascar's, let's say, half the size of South Africa, and it's got 432 species, and South Africa, being twice the size, only has 135 species. Here is a photo that I took of a young lady at a camp, sort of an education camp that we had. On the Thursday, she explained to me she didn't want to see a frog. Marius, I'm so scared of frogs. Please don't show me any frogs. That was the Thursday. This photo was taken by Sunday, and she said, Marius, I love frogs. So, attitudes can be changed as we go along, provided that you get out of your room, get your torch, get your feet wet, and go see what the frogs are up to. Right, now we're doing a big jump, and in terms of geography and also time. The year 2000 was when I met Steve Goodman and Brian Fisher. We were in Gabon, surveying the Mondudu area, and yes, you have no furniture there nowadays. Some surveys can still be very rough, but most surveys kind of fairly decent. If you wanted a chair, you had to make a chair. If you wanted a table, you had to make a table. If you want a roof, you want to stay dry, you have to make all of these things. So this is how we operated. We didn't have any spare ways of charging your stuff. We didn't have solar or anything like that. So we had lots and lots of batteries. The Smithsonian survey was a little bit more comfortable, organized, I guess. very wet areas, the camps where we were staying. Sometimes it would just rain for several days, and you spend a few weeks there, you come out being quite clammy yourself. Okay, Olivier Pauws is a herpetologist from Belgium. Here we have a small dwarf crocodile. Actually, it was a large, medium-sized dwarf crocodile, because they are dwarf, they're small. And a species of soft-shell terrapin from that region, and a species of Pelusius. Yes, correct, Pelusius. All right, one of the highlights was a Leptodactylodon. I think it was Leptodactylodon blanci. Prior to that, it was only known from one other locality. So these are the highlights of every survey. It's already good finding the common species, but it's much better to finding rare species and new species. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit faster. We're still moving around in Gabon to different areas. Petit Luangu, very well organized camp. In the area, there are also gorillas and chimpanzees, elephants. On the beach, you would get buffalo, forest buffalo, and in the water, when I say water, in the sea, hippos. Hippopotamus would sometimes go into the waves. A very unusual thing for a hippo to do. And at night, some of the marine turtles, in this case a leatherback, coming to lay eggs. Another locality in Gabon at the Rabi oil fields, big old group of herpetologists, and one of them, the one on the right, is bull branch. So if you are familiar with the reptiles and amphibians, or mostly the reptiles of South Africa, bull branch would be the name well known to you. And Olivier Pauws again. And here we are dealing with a tree cobra, Gold's tree cobra. This was a highlight for us of that particular trip. A python with a very large prey item. I don't know what it ate, but presumably either a bush pig or something like that, or a small antelope. Okay, so yeah, as I said, snakes are the glamorous animals, but my preference still is amphibians. Central African Republic was in 2001, if I remember correctly. There we go, there's Brian Fisher, and in the distance an elephant. So we did about a 5-week survey in Central African Republic. Steve Goodman was also part of that. There's Brian again. He's not a bride. Nobody married him. We have several Bahaka pygmies here with us. But what's happening there is there's so many of these irritating little sweat bees, mupani, little bees, flies, and they get in everywhere. So when you get a chance, we cut up our mosquito nets, and we were wearing them as like veils, just to keep those things out of your nostrils and your eyes and your ears. Again, if you want to work, if you want a chair, you have to make a chair, otherwise it's on the ground. Whilst we were there, the Bahaka pygmies would, serpent, noir, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, they are watching me catching this forest cobra. Subsequently, this specific species of cobra has been divided into 5 different species. At the time, it was just the one forest cobra. Now it's 5 different ones. And as before, essential to also collect voucher specimens if you want to publish about the herpetofauna of these places. All right, in Congo, I'm trying to speak fast because it's a 45-minute talk. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to make it, and I'm saying unnecessary stuff like this, which just takes up even more time. All right, herpetofauna survey in the Republic of Congo. It was a mining project, iron ore, and this is, of course, the stuff that we dread as environmentalists, as biologists, as conservationists, the destruction, the removal of natural environment for products that we need. So we typically think of the mining industry as unfavorable because they destroy habitat, they destroy biodiversity, they reduce biodiversity. But there are also benefits for these projects, and this is something that I've come to learn over the years. I know of some regions, and the specific example that I'm using here is projects that were conducted in Congo that were previously completely unsurveyed, and they probably would still be unsurveyed to this day if it wasn't for the fact that mining projects were initiated. And these companies have to abide to the standards of international finance corporations and performance standards and all of those things. So they have to be compliant when it comes to environmental degradation and so forth. I'm going to briefly try and go through 9 surveys, multidisciplinary surveys in the Republic of Congo. So the areas that we worked in was Sintakola, Hinda, all in the Kuili River Basin near Point Noir, and Mayoko. So in 1991, based on a mining project, the first publication came out about the reptiles and amphibians of that particular area. In 2010, there was another publication. These are the areas that were surveyed. And then I became involved in 2012 and 2014 and 2016. So suddenly an area that was completely unknown or poorly known is now one of the best known areas in the Congo. I'm going to run through some examples. Again, the accommodation has been an upgrade since what we had. We even had air conditioning in our tents, really luxury. Different habitat. It's not rainforest. It's kind of, there are forest elements. There's some marsh forest and mangrove stuff close to the sea, of course. So a very different habitat to, say, Congo, even though this is in the Congo, but the rainforest itself in Gabon. And lots of savanna. And savanna, once you have a mosaic of savanna and rainforest, you're actually in a better position because you can get the diversity. There's quite a changeover of species between these environments. Pitfall traps, trap arrays and funnels out in the savanna. But what does savanna do? It burns. So here we go. We had our traps out, and the next day our traps were burnt in this fire. Not sure if it was set on purpose or if it's just one of the coincidental or regular fires, but yeah, this was not appreciated. Okay, some more terrapins in the water. This is a soft-shell terrapin, a very large species that the people in that region also eat, and a species of terrestrial tortoise. The genus is Erosa. Very lovely, those little spines on the costal scales of this tortoise. A variety of lizards. I don't want to go into details, but if you look at this chameleon, again, if you're familiar with Madagascar Bruchisia, then the Rampholian fairly similar. Okay, pythons. This they call a ground python, but it's not really a python, it's the boa. So in Madagascar you have boas, you have no pythons. Africa has pythons, but no boas really, except for in strict sense this is a kind of boa, but they call it a python. If any of this makes any sense, don't worry about it too much. Lots of species of small snakes, most of them harmless. But that snake, it's a banded snake, but there's a cobra that is banded, a water cobra, and a banded water snake. And if it moves fast, you're not quite sure what you're dealing with. So by the time I had it by its tail there, I was indecisive, is this the harmless snake or am I catching a cobra? But it was the harmless one. All right, Bothrophthalmus bruneus, and a little later on there's going to be a different species of Bothrophthalmus. So keep that one in mind. Some more harmless green snakes of the genus Phyllothamnus, file snake, egg-eating snake, and then some of the dangerous snake, in this case the Bitus nasicornis, a viper of incredible coloration. You can't imagine that a snake would have such intricate patterns, you know. Same with the Gaboon viper, a bizarre snake. Whew, I realize I still have quite a bit to go. I'm going to try and go a bit faster. So we studied an area called Mayoko. We did several surveys there. And as an offset, we studied a second area called Chingadi, the lower Blues area. And without going into too much details, I'm going to focus just on the amphibians. The first survey was in April 2012, 15 species of amphibians. It was just kind of a quick survey. But the very first frog in the first bucket turned out to be a new species to science. A little while later, in the same year, it went up to 45 species of amphibians, and at least 2 of those were new. So together for those 2 surveys, it was 47 species. And then a little later on, we went and focused specifically on the new species. So we were doing more surveys, and in that survey it was 46 species, and but combined it's 53. What this shows is when you go back to the same area, even if you manage to get 45 species in one survey, the longer you stay and move around slowly but surely the accumulation of species still happen. It's very difficult to find or to survey all of the species, especially when it comes to reptiles. Amphibians, you have a reasonable chance, so then we went to the Tsingidi, the offset area, and collectively it pushed it up to 58 again. And if you start looking at it, you will find that each section has similar species, but also unique species, so some of them are shared. And in the end, the aim of this particular thing was to sort of see if the offset area is similar to or better than the area that will be sacrificed for this mining project. It was a mountain covered in rainforest with gorillas, with elephants. By the time the mining project is done, it's a whole 400 meters in the ground, filled with water. So the whole mountain and catchment and forest would be missing. It's a radical impact. But new species of frogs were found in that area, both in the area that was to be mined and also in the offset area. This was one of the highlight new species. These have all been described. There are some that still needs further work. And so in summary, as I say, we started looking at the mining industry as being a problem for biodiversity, and it is. But the flip side of that coin is that we were managing to do the first surveys, biodiversity surveys, herb surveys in this area, new species for the country, new species for science, and there were even new country endemics, and lots of peripheral information as well about natural history and biology of the species. Very importantly, also in Congo specifically, especially, there are very few people that are biologists. It's kind of a very unpopular career to have. People don't want to be that. When I look at Madagascar compared to Congo, you guys are some decades ahead in terms of local biologists, in-country biologists, which is unfortunately lacking still in many of the African countries. All right, and mitigating measures were formed. All right, I'm sure I'm over my 45 minutes, but here we go. So people eating animals in Madagascar, bush meat, ranging from monkeys. This is probably also one of the sensitive photos. And they would spend weeks in the forest and then drive to town with the monkeys and the antelope and so forth, crocodiles, smoked, and which they then sell in towns. Right, this is our last country before we get to Madagascar. Very quickly, we're in Liberia, which is in West Africa, also in rainforest. We flew there. At the airport, we were welcomed by these agamas, very common. And this is what a biodiversity team looks like. It's got the botanists, the entomologists, the bird people, the fish people, the mammal people, and the herb people. Day one, fantastic. So happy to find let me go back to the previous one. There's old Ryan having a good old smile again. It was the same guy that had the Atheris barbari. He loves finding vipers. So this is the West African gaboon viper, a stunning snake. All right, Atheris chloricus, another bush viper from the rainforest, and one of these species of forest cobras that were then divided into 5 different species. This is one of the new, how can you say, derivatives of the original forest cobra. Okay, a few more green snakes, and then remember I said that there was a snake, Borthothulmus, to think about, and here it is. It's one of the most incredible snakes that I've ever found in Africa. Just so beautiful. It's completely harmless, but a wonderful snake. That was a wow on my radar. Okay, and processing specimens as well, and training in-country biologists. Caecilians. Now this is an amphibian without legs. So it's not a worm, it's not a snake, it's an amphibian with no legs. There are caecilians on the Seychelles, several species, but none on Madagascar. And it's one of those mysteries. Why are there no caecilians on Madagascar? And there's in West Africa, this was discovered by means of molecular studies, an endemic vertebrate family. It's the only family of vertebrates endemic to West Africa is a group of frogs. All right, so we're ending off with a primate from Africa, from mainland Africa, and we're moving on to to the island of Madagascar at the lemurs. What species is this? Yeah, it's a Shifaka. It's from Dairana. It's the golden crown Shifaka, I think is the common name. All right, and this is the crown Shifaka from around Ankarana and those places. Over the years, I've come here time and again, bringing tourists. You'll see everybody's looking at the lemurs or the birds in the tree, except for Christina. She's a herpetologist. She's not interested in the birds and the lemurs in the tree. She's looking for chameleons and snakes and what have you. And we have my mother. My mother came with me on a trip. My mother, my sister, and a few friends. And early on today, I said to her that she was going to be in a talk in Madagascar. And she's ooh and ah and very proud. And she's missing Madagascar. She wants to come back. But if you come on a trip with me in Madagascar as a regular tourist, doesn't matter where you come from England, from Ireland, whatever your comfort zone may have been, it changes once you're on a trip with me, because I'll make you do things that you probably wouldn't ordinarily do, or your grandchildren might be very fascinated by what you're doing, but your children themselves would be alarmed. And at this one particular place, we found this lovely ground boa. People were all very eager to hold it, except for the pathologist. She was more of a frog person, more like me, less eager for the snakes. Madagascar, so whether it's reptiles, whether it's birds, whether it's invertebrates, there's so much happening. I fell in love when I first came in 93, I came back in 94, I came back in 95, 96, I came back twice, and so it went on. And I'm apologizing for the long delay of almost 10 years, but I'm back here. We'll be here for a while in the next, 2 years or so. But I'll just run very quickly through a variety of frogs. I think this is almost self-explanatory. Why would I be interested in frogs? Why do I even need to justify it? There's so much variety, so much beauty in these photogenic creatures. even upside down, there's beauty and color. All the way to the tomato frog, and a variety of snakes, the ground boas, the previous one, the tree boa. Most of all of the snakes are harmless. Some of them have some venom, here's a langaha, but none of them are going to do serious harm to humans if we get bitten. A variety of lizards, geckos. Now remember I was saying about this gecko, this is a gecko from Kenya, and the tail, look at the scales on that tail, and it reminds me so much of a gecko here in Madagascar called the fish-scaled gecko, Gecko lepus, which is when you grab this gecko, it twists in your hand, and you're left with scales in your hand. So when you grab a lizard by the tail, or some lizards, the tail breaks off and then it makes its escape. This gecko wriggles out of its skin to make its escape. It's radical. Then it regenerates the skin. So the fish-scaled gecko. Okay, these are the ones that you must know very well. They are probably on the buildings right here as we speak. Different species in Madagascar, all over. I can't remember how many. Let's say 25 or so of Phelsuma, diurnal, very colorful geckos. And the complete opposite to Phelsuma geckos are your Europlatus geckos. The Phelsuma wants to be seen. Here I am, moving around a lot. And whereas the Europlatus, they just want to blend in. They don't want to be seen. You guys are probably quite familiar with this. But for people that don't, that's the eye of the gecko. And he's really just becoming one. That's his hind foot there, I think. And his tail, so it's just blending in with the lichens and mosses on the tree. There you can see him coming out of his pose. So you either try and look like the bark of trees, or you try and look like the leaves, dry leaves of vegetation. Look at this. This guy's even got pigmentation on the skin that resembles rotten leaves and bark and so forth. And yeah, this is something I wish I could do, lick my eyeball. I wouldn't have to explain why I'm a frog biologist. I can just say hello and lick my eyeball, and enough said, right? Madagascar, the island of chameleons. I don't know if you know the story of Labord's chameleon, Fucifer labordi. That's the female in response to the male. This is a species of chameleon that is in its chameleon form just for a few months of the year, let's say 4 to 5 months, and most of the time it's in its egg stage. So there are certain time of the year that there are no specimens on Earth, anywhere on Earth. All the adults have died and they only exist as eggs. We refer to them as annual chameleons. Okay. Ooh, yeah, almost 100, let's say basically 100 species of chameleons in Madagascar. Some of them are very big, like this Austerlitz chameleon. And then on the other extreme, you have these very tiny, small Bruchisia chameleons. We're almost done. There's only about 10 slides left. So thank you very much for sitting patiently in the heat. I said it was going to be 45 minutes. I lied. If you look at these chameleons, and because most of the time I'm in Africa, mainland Africa, and I'm used to finding them in Poland. I'm repeating myself, but there's such a similarity. The fact that the same trick is tried or used on these two different places. So there's a lot of similarity between Africa, mainland Africa and Madagascar, and then there are also just some things like the boas and the pleurid lizards that don't make sense at all. And I'm ending off with Brian Fisher, because he was one of the first biologists that I met in Madagascar all those years ago. He didn't like me at first. He thought, who's this guy from South Africa, trying to worm his way into my projects and all of that. But it only took a few days in the bush and a few THBs, and we became friends. I haven't seen him in a long time, but it's because of communications with him a few days ago that he insisted I come to the Biodiversity Center today, not only for the tour, but also to tell you about herping in Africa. So here we are in Africa. Brian, as you know him, if you work with him, he's a jolly guy. He's forever, making friends and entertaining people as we go along. I'm ending off in Kirindi. Every year, I think it's every year, they have the Tropical Biological Association, TBA courses there. Students from all around the world pulling in to study biodiversity of Madagascar. Some of the African people little uncertain of what they're dealing with. Here's a guy that only managed to catch the lizard's tail. But yeah, it's quite a paradigm shift to be from Africa and to come to an area where you can handle snakes without fear of nasty bites. All right, thank you very much. That's I should say Misratra Indrindra Anario Rehatra. Is that very wrong or almost correct? Thank you very much. Okay.